Good morning. Oh, that's like Monday. It's Friday, and it's not snowing, and it's supposed to make it into the 70s today and tomorrow. So good morning. Okay, that's a lot better. Good. So I know when I go home tonight, my wife is a pre-K teacher, and we always compare who had the more interesting or fun day. I don't want to be overtaken by 24-year-olds, so I want to say mine was much more exciting. You should have seen the people I was with today. So, Christine, thank you for the amazing work you do with the student for the Center for Student Success. It makes a profound difference to our colleges, makes us much stronger as colleges, and I hope that for others in our high schools who are taking advantage of it as well, you find the same is true and that it's really nourishing your work. I know that you're going to learn a lot today. I'm very, very excited to have an opportunity to hear from our speaker. But I also, before we get there, want to recognize we have great leadership, and it really takes that. Christine is a real leader in our system, and I know she gets tremendous support from our new president. And I'm always happy to say, because I'm one of the newer presidents in the system, but the president of NJCCC is newer than me, so I'm not the newest guy on the block. But Aaron Fichter has been absolutely amazing for us, and it really is an honor, as you heard earlier, that we have Larry Nespoli with us, who really dedicated so much of his life to making our college system as strong and as powerful as it is. I spent 9 years working with secondary and post-secondary education, and it just makes me absolutely thrilled to know that in this room today we have individuals from high schools and from the community colleges, and all of which are focused on student success and really making an impact and helping these people become an active and important part of the workforce. This is the group, essentially, that makes New Jersey and makes America move forward. So thank you for your very, very hard work. I have the great honor this morning, and it really is, of introducing our keynote speaker. And you've got some words in regard to him in your programs and so forth. Let me share with you and then try to expand just a little bit upon that as well. You know, as an educator, one of the things that I still delight in every day and take very seriously for my own growth is the opportunity to learn. Okay, we don't simply teach or build programs and systems, but the opportunity to learn. And again, I know I'll have that opportunity. I know you're here to embrace that as well. So our keynote speaker, Dr. Karl Van Horn, is an individual who is widely recognized, nationally recognized as an authority on workforce, human resources, and employment policy issues. He has an extensive background, and I've just heard so many glowing things, having met him this morning, but from others who have known you considerably longer, about the important work that he has done on behalf of workforce and the economy nationally, and being a strong advocate for community colleges as well. He is considered one of the nation's leading academics on workforce policy and practice. He is a distinguished professor of public policy at the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers University. He is a member of the university's graduate faculty on planning and public policy management and labor relations. Some of his earliest work I remember as somewhere right between being a grad student finishing out and just beginning teaching, for an appointment he received under President Clinton to work with a very complicated, very complex issue and helping to negotiate a new contract between labor and management in the railroad industry, without which our nation effectively would have come to a pretty firm and fast halt. He is also a fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration and a visiting non-resident scholar at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. He has written over 100 articles and 17 books, including No One Left Behind, Economic Change, and the American Worker. Dr. Van Horn has held several senior-level policy positions in government, not simply the one that I had mentioned in terms of his important role, but as the chair of the Board of Directors of the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, Director of Policy for the State of New Jersey, Vice Chair of New Jersey's Governor-elect John Corzine's transition, and senior economist at the Joint Economic Committee of the United States Congress. So when we talk about we have the opportunity to learn from one of the foremost authorities, an individual with tremendous background and experience in academics, in theory, and in practice, I say with great confidence and a great deal of honor, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Karl Van Horn.
Thank you very much. With an introduction like that, I think only my wife could have done a better job. And she is here today, my wife, Christy Van Horn. I want to recognize her. Christy's here to tell me honestly tonight over dinner how I did today. And we've been together for 40 years, and so she's earned the right to do that. She also is the chairwoman of the Student Higher Education Assistance Authority. So she's intimately involved in supporting your students, and she herself was also a teacher in elementary school many years ago. So, Christy, thank you for coming here today. And I'm very honored, I am honored to be with you today. The president is right. I have been a strong supporter of community colleges throughout my career. Also, I'm so glad there are high school teachers here and counselors as well. There's nothing more important in my mind than helping young people launch themselves into the next phase of their life and career, and all of you play a very important role in that. I play some role in that when they're a bit older, when they get to me in graduate school, but what I enjoy the most about teaching is mentoring students, and I know that all of you do that every day. So I'm going to do something very unusual today. I'm going to make a presentation without a PowerPoint. So get ready, fasten your seatbelts. So it is possible to talk without a PowerPoint, and I'm going to prove that. I want to cover a lot of ground today, and because of not using a PowerPoint, I will be posting my remarks on our website, so feel free to doze off if you want, but perhaps you'll listen. So I'm going to cover a lot of territory today. So what I'm trying to do also is give you a bit of a framework for thinking about the important work you do by giving you a tour of the economy. What's happened in the last 10 years, what's happening now, and what are the implications of that. So first, let's talk about the positive news. So this is post-recession. We're almost 9 years since the recession officially ended in August of 2009. And back then, the unemployment rate was 10%, and now it's 4%. We've had positive job growth for 9 years running, and that's 17 million more jobs added to the economy than were true in 2009 in June. So this is a really significant progress. Unfortunately, there's still some troubling signs in the economy nationally and here in New Jersey. One, which I care a lot about, is long-term unemployment. Long-term unemployment has remained very high. There's 1.3 million workers who have been unemployed for more than 6 months and unable to find a job, and over half of those people are older workers. They're over the age of 50, right? So right at the point where they need to be making the most to get prepared for retirement, they're not able to find a job. And a great deal of those people have bachelor's degrees or better. All right, so these are not people who are typically chronically unemployed, but now they find themselves unemployed. New Jersey, unfortunately, is the state among the top 3 states in a category we don't want to be in the top 3 of, which is we have a very large share of long-term unemployed workers. Also, New Jersey's unemployment rate remains above the national average, right? So we're not doing as well as the rest of the country. And also importantly, there's about 5 million people in this country and several 100,000 in New Jersey who are working part-time, but they actually need and want a full-time job, right? So we call these involuntary part-time workers. These are not folks who say, hey, I want to work part-time, I have children to take care of, or elderly relative. No, these are folks that really need to work full-time. And we still lack several million jobs to get to what we call full employment. The second trend is that high school and college graduates are still encountering really stiff headwinds as they enter the labor market. So, for example, nearly 1 in 5 recent high school graduates are unemployed. So think about that. The unemployment rate's 4% overall, but 16% of those younger workers, 17 to 20, are unemployed. And almost a third are underemployed. In other words, they can't find a full-time job. They're in that part-time place. Recent college graduates also have higher unemployment rates than the national average. So they're about 5.6%, and another 12% are involuntary part-time workers. So they haven't found a job yet. They haven't got into the labor market. And in New Jersey, we have this similar story, which is 11% of workers under the age of 25 are unemployed, right? So again, that's almost 3 times the overall unemployment rate for the state. And unfortunately, it wouldn't surprise you, the situation for young minorities is even worse. More than 25% of young African American high school graduates and nearly 1 in 5 Hispanic high school graduates are unemployed and not enrolled in further schooling. So it's not that they're in school, they're unemployed. They want to work, but they're not getting a job. So those are distressing trends nationally and in New Jersey. The third is that wages have not increased to keep up the pace of inflation. And this is a long-term trend, almost 30 years. If you look from 30 years ago to today, people are essentially either even or slightly down when you look at the national average. And fourth, the percentage of people in the labor force, what we call the labor force participation rate, technical term, those who are either working or looking for work, has fallen to its lowest level in 3 decades. So what that means is there are fewer people in the economy. There are people that have given up. They've dropped out because they have no hope. They don't think they can find a job. And what that really means is we have an economy that is not as productive as it should be. The less people that are working, the less our economy continues to grow, all right? And this is particularly troubling because about 7 million people who are of prime working age, which we call 25 to 54, are not in the labor force. Some of them because of the opioid crisis, but that's not the bulk of it. But most of them because they live in rural, isolated communities, or because the jobs they were in have disappeared permanently, and they're unable to connect. And unfortunately, New Jersey is lagging other parts of the country post-recession. So our overall GDP growth rate is almost flat. It's 0.3%, so that means just across that 9-year period, we've just barely, slightly above keeping even. And the national economy is not doing so well either, but we're not doing as well, right? So we've had essentially 0 employment growth over that period. So in short, New Jersey has really not done well for the last 9 years, and we have to work our way out of that, and that's going to take some period of time. Okay, so that's the picture. Positive overall, but still really significant problems, and New Jersey lagging and in the caboose, if you will, and should be leading the pack. So what are the new realities when we think about the labor market? Well, I want to point out that the Great Recession was the worst recession in 70 years. And when we look back historically at the Depression, which, believe it or not, I was not there for that, but during the Depression, it took us several decades to recover, and it actually was World War II and the mobilization for that effort that helped pull us out of that Depression. So that took over 10 years. And so we're really still experiencing the very, very many negative consequences of the Great Recession. But there are other disruptive forces that have been going on in the labor market that I'm sure you're familiar with, not the least of which is rapid technological changes and global competition, right? So those forces were underway before the Great Recession and continued and will continue into the future. And of course, the Great Recession caused a great deal of shocks, but even as it ebbs, we still have these disruptive forces in the economy. The fact is there are just fewer stable permanent jobs than there were 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. Therefore, few workers are ever going to ride that smooth escalator from beginning to the end of their career with the same company or the same career, right? I always refer to my father as a prime example in my life because he worked at U.S. Steel in Pennsylvania for 41 years and retired with a nice pension and a good health care benefit. Very few people can say they're going to do that anymore. Tenured professors actually are one of those. I'm happy to be one of those, but even tenured professors are declining as a percentage of the total amount of folks in academia. And the rising expectations for employers is the other factor, which they actually require better prepared workers than they used to. And part of the reason is they're spending less on onboarding, that is bringing people into the workforce. They expect you to be a successful, productive employee from day one. And so what that does is it really puts more pressure on educational institutions and on students to get ready for the job, right, which is the topic of your conference. Also, because of the volatility of the labor market, these rapid changes I was referring to, it's very hard to predict 5 years, 10 years, let alone 20 years, what kind of choices you should make now that are going to lead to a very successful career, right? Lots of people do this. The Bureau of Labor Statistics does it every year. They make 10-year projections, right? Well, a colleague and I looked at that a couple of years ago to see how accurate were those 10-year projections. Essentially, they were off by about 60 to 70%, okay? So, and I'm not blaming them for that. It's the reality of the labor market. It is just extremely difficult to predict. And so these structural consequences, these changes, I guess my point is, don't think about the recession as a temporary thing, that now it's gotten better, we don't have to worry about this anymore. This is a permanent feature of the labor market for the young people that we're working with for the rest of their career. So what are the implications for high schools and colleges? Well, the first is there's a real demand, as I said before, to reinvent high schools and post-secondary education. Business leaders are worried, parents are worried, students are worried, and policymakers, businesses, and foundations are putting a great deal of pressures to deliver these better prepared individuals. And in the labor market now, there has been what we call credential creep upward, which is that jobs that used to be taken by high school students are now taken by folks, high school graduates, are now taken by folks who've gone to community college and graduated. Jobs that used to be taken by the community college grads are now taken by people with bachelor's degrees, and so on and so forth. I mean, one of the things this has done is create a lot of business for our enterprises, people rushing to try to get credentials. But as people do that, employers keep ratcheting up their expectations, right? They keep asking for more. And we've done some analysis of job ads, and many others have as well, to show this trend that's going up. So I know this in my academic environment, that many students are now, who have master's degrees, are doing jobs that even 10 years ago, clearly it would have been a person you would hire with just a BA. Okay, so this has created, in a sense, a vicious cycle, I would say, in which people seek further education, they incur more debt often, but that doesn't necessarily lead to the return on investment that they hope for, right? Because they spend a lot of money getting there, and then they don't get necessarily the payoff. So, you know, what do we do about this? Well, for decades, we have done a great job, actually, at improving access to post-secondary education. And as you know, we've made a lot less progress with people getting through and actually getting that credential, right? At bachelor's degree institutions, which have, most of them have open admissions policies, essentially, only about 1/3 of those students get a bachelor's degree in 6 years. And so that's why I never call them four-year institutions anymore. That's really not true. It's actually 6 or more. And there's nothing, in a sense, I wouldn't say nothing, there's few things that are worse than a person who goes to college, incurs debt, and then doesn't finish. Because then they have no credential, which would potentially boost their salary to help them pay off their debt, and yet they still have the debt. Because as we know, debts are what you call non-dischargeable obligations, right? Because it's not like a car. If you can't afford the car, you leave it beside the road and somebody picks it up and you're at least free of that problem. You are the person who owes the money. So the average student today, this is average in 2016, owes $37,000, right? So again, this is having an effect on purchase of housing, people getting married, people having children because they have this debt. And this affects 44 million students in the United States. And as you probably know, the student debt is the second largest amount of consumer debt in the country behind only mortgages, right? The other factor, which I'm sure you know, is students are much more likely to work while they're in school because the cost of education has gone up. And so this slows down their progress, right, as either in high school or in college, as they have to work to pay the bills. So what are employers doing? As I said before, in survey and after survey, employers complain that they're not getting the kind of students that they'd like to get. And really what's happening is they've used the credential, the acquisition of another credential, as a way to screen people, right? So they're ratcheting up expectations. They're saying you have to have more demands, more credentials, know how to do more things. And often when you talk to the hiring managers, which I have and others, it's actually the HR department that's increased the credentials because they want a stronger filter, right? Okay. So educators obviously are going to find it very difficult to satisfy everybody in this situation. The students are worried, their parents are worried, the employers are complaining, and it's really not possible to satisfy everyone. So what do you do? How do you manage this, I guess I would call it a rising tide of dissatisfaction? Well, first of all, I want to say it's not hopeless, but we have to begin with a couple realities. First of all, we cannot expect to predict future changes in the labor market. We should give up on that. You can make short-term understandings, but what we're doing is preparing people for careers that are going to last potentially 50 years, right? So as we already heard at the beginning here, many of the jobs that you have didn't exist even 10 years ago, right? Let's also understand that the demand for better qualified workers is going to continue, right? Because employers face competition with each other and globally, and so of course they're in a constant battle and a war for talent. So they're going to keep ratcheting up their demands. Another point to make is that when you hear there are skill shortages, evidence is clear that these are often exaggerated by employers, okay? That doesn't mean there aren't spot shortages and there are problems, but often what this reflects is the fact that they are trying to acquire employees at the cost they want to pay. And if they were to increase their wages, they would be able to get them, right? Now, if we're employers, and I'm an employer, I have people that work for me, I don't want to have to pay more to hire people, but when I'm looking for a specialized skill, that's exactly what I have to do. So that's not going to stop. And in fact, there's plenty of evidence that employers perceive skill shortages really no matter what era. And I've seen this when the unemployment rate was 10%, and I've seen it when it's 4%, right? I would say right now there really are shortages in many cases, but as I alluded to before, they're overlooking part of the labor market that's there and talented and could be hired, but they're in a sense not looking in the right places. Another reality to keep in mind is that all good jobs do not require a college degree or even an associate's degree, but most require some form of post-secondary education, especially in an industry-recognized credential. So that's not going to change. But the idea that you can only succeed if you have a bachelor's degree is clearly misleading. On the other hand, liberal arts are certainly still valuable, especially given the fact that employers are ratcheting up expectations. Unfortunately, as I alluded to before, that bachelor's degree may not be sufficient for the kinds of career that a person aspires to. So we have to be very careful about applying sweeping generalities about the labor market, that it's bad or it's good, that there's skill shortages, there aren't. We really have to dig into the details and understand on our own communities and our own employers what are the realities that are going to help people succeed. Because just as there are huge variations across educational institutions, so too is there huge variations about what employers think, and there's huge variations in what students are like. I particularly am annoyed, being the parent of 2 millennials, when people characterize millennials broadly speaking. They can't do this, they can't do this, this is what they believe in. This is the equal to the number of baby boomers in the population. So think about that. Are all baby boomers alike? Are they identical? Did everybody like Bruce Springsteen? I don't. Sorry, but you know, there you go. I mean, there are exceptions, right? So we can't overgeneralize. And of course, you know that because you work with students individually. The other point is that we, as educators and students and families, can't change the labor market, right? So what we have to do is adjust to it and help people overcome some of the barriers. So what would I do, right? I would begin by concentrating on what we do best. And that is building foundational knowledge, skills, and abilities. And teaching students how to learn, right? Because to sustain yourself across a lifetime of work, it's always been true you need to know how to learn. Now, you're going to have to be a do-it-yourself learner as you go into your career. The second point I make is we do not need to reinvent the list of skills that we need for labor market success. For more than 25 years over that, and I've been in many of these meetings, employers and academic researchers have consistently and repeatedly come to the same conclusion. The landmark report, which I suggest you look at, was called the Secretary's Commission on Achieving Necessary Skills, SCANS. That's in 1991, right? And they concluded, and it's still true today, that all sectors of the economy and nearly all occupations have in common a need for certain necessary skills. Now, they didn't say sufficient, but they said necessary. You have to have these skills. And they're made up of 3 foundational abilities and 5 competencies. And I'm not going to elaborate because I think you know all of them. It's basic skills, critical thinking skills, and personal qualities, such as responsibility, self-esteem, self-management, and integrity. And then there are 5 core competencies. Resources, which is how to allocate time, money, and materials. Interpersonal skills, working with others, teaching others, and serving customers. Negotiating. Information, how to acquire and evaluate data and organize and maintain information. Systems, understanding social, organizational, and technological systems. And finally, technology. So 1991, there was technology there, believe it or not, okay? So those 3 core core skills and 5 competencies show up in almost every occupation. If you go on ONET, which is the Department of Labor's classification of over 1,000 jobs, you will find, and if you just did a content analysis, whether you're a cybersecurity expert, an auditor, a human resource specialist, a repair mechanic, you would find those same skills listed in those occupational analyses. Now, I would be the first to say that it's a lot easier to list those skills than it is to find effective ways to teach them. But having said that, I guess the point is we should spend less time debating what people need to learn and more time figuring out how to do the best job of teaching people what we think they need to learn. Because we already know that. And there are lots of different job titles over time, and jobs come and go, but these basic skills are not likely to change. We need to be deeply committed to helping people achieve those skills. As my friend and colleague, Georgetown professor Bill Gormley says in a book which I commend to you, it's called Critical Thinking, it's a Harvard Business Education. He says, quote, "The truth is that all students need job-relevant skills, and most students are not getting them in schools today. What is required is not a wholesale transformation of the curriculum from academic instruction to vocational education, but a more subtle shift in emphasis to include job-relevant skills across schools, across grades, and across subjects," right? So I reject the idea that the American education system is failing and that it's broken. It is not, okay? That is a false narrative that is really myopic and also often pushed by people who are marketing some other product, okay? So The system is not broken, but that doesn't mean it doesn't need reform. And I think that if we set our sights in a different direction, how do we make sure that whatever we do, we are focusing on those core learning objectives? Then we will be doing the job to prepare young people to make better decisions and more informed decisions about their career choices, their academic choices, and preparing them better for their careers. We need to develop a much more accurate and nuanced message about education and training options for students. Attending college is a good aspiration for millions, and there's no reason to discourage people to do that. But when a large percentage of them are not going to obtain that degree in 6 years or 8 years or 10 years, we're doing a disservice to those who aren't going to college if we don't also focus on their needs and how they can be successful in a labor market that will demand their best abilities as well. So what I want to leave you with today is just a few tips for your consideration as you continue here today and in the future. The first is put greater emphasis on work-based learning, how we can combine work and education to give them the job-relevant skills that people need, to help young people get a better understanding about work and what is required in the workplace. And a lot of that is simply by doing internships and part-time jobs and doing that in an intentional way to help them learn about what have they gathered from that experience. We need to do a better job as an education community of integrating our academic, financial, and career advice with students. These are often siloed at different places. They actually are all part of the same stew that they really should be together. And we should be helping students make informed choices based on the evidence the best evidence available. And we do know a lot about careers and potential paths that students need help to discover. There's so many students who I've seen over my career come to me and say, I want to work in public service. I want to do good for the world. Okay, great. I think that's wonderful. But you have to help them get to the next point of, well, what is it that you want to contribute and where might you be able to do that? Because there's so many ways in which you can do that, and you have to spend a lot of time exploring what kind of job do they really care for. And with respect to employers, we need to engage and consult with them, but also negotiate if we can, because employers, although they have the jobs, they don't necessarily have the complete insight into how students can be successful. So, let me end with simply saying that we know a lot about how to do this. You are all involved in this on a regular basis, and I honor your work. And I hope that as you go forward, you will think about these core demands and integrate them into your work as you work with students in the classroom and outside the classroom to help them achieve the success that they want. So thank you very much, and I wish you have a very successful conference.